On this episode, we talk to industry veteran and Director of Client Managers, Mr. Steve Seitner, about hospital contracts and the differences that we're seeing nowadays. Atlas All Access starts now.
From Kirkham at 0450.
Mr. Steve Seitner is with us today.
Good morning.
Welcome, Steve.
Industry veteran.
Expert. I like how you didn't put expert until Adam just said expert.
Expert.
We'll go with veteran.
Veteran.
I don't want to speak out of turn.
You've been in the industry for 15 years now?
15, 16 years at this point. Yes, sir.
Man, so longer than me
Yes, sir.
by a year.
By a wide margin.
It's like a year.
It is a year.
Who better to talk about hospital contracts though than is with our Director of Client Management here is Mr. Seitner. So
we'll give it a good go.
Yeah,
and I think try at least.
It'll be fun. It'll be a fun exercise just because I think there's a lot of confusion out there as to just who holds what or what a VMS is, what an MSP is, what that type of thing. So let's.
I think that's the first question. Really, is the distinction of an MSP and a VMS.
Yeah. So let's talk through that. Let's and that was actually one of the questions I didn't have written down, but I knew we would get to. What's the difference?
Yeah, I guess at its simplest form, the difference between VMS and MSP, they both ultimately serve as a staffing resource for hospitals and platforms even outside of healthcare staffing. But the difference mainly is the VMS is just a software that acts as a staffing body, doesn't necessarily have any recruiting interest itself as far as reaching out and doing the hiring, doing the onboarding, doing the qualifying. It is simply a software or a website that companies like ours would use to submit nurses either to a hospital or to a secondary vendor. Now, an MSP is a managed service provider. The big distinction there is that in addition to having the software, they themselves are doing the recruiting first and foremost. So traditionally, at least within these four walls, we identify the difference as being an MSP has a vested interest in recruiting their nurses usually first and foremost. And then after they've kind of used up all of their resources and haven't maybe been able to fill a spot, then they will sub them out to companies like ours. Whereas a VMS, traditionally, every company that signs up through it gets the needs from day one.
So is there a industry standard for an MSP? How long do they try to fill those jobs internally before they release them to the sub vendors?
And there's going to be a lot of inconsistency, and probably through this whole thing, I'm going to say, no two companies operate the same.
Yes.
Even companies within themselves will have different agreements in place with the clients that they serve. There are some companies out there that truly do give us things lifetime, and then there are companies that we've heard of hold jobs for up to 21 days, 24 days in worst case scenarios before they'll go out and try and bring companies like us in. So, I would say the common thread we usually see is somewhere around that 4 to 5 day limit, one business week to try and fill it in-house before they give us a crack at it.
So then from a recruiter standpoint, that makes a pretty big difference when you're recruiting.
Yeah, and like Steve said, everything is kind of fluid and changing all the time, and I think that's even the best recruiters can get slipped up by the best travelers out there, because information that is a week old or 2 weeks old, it can switch from a VMS or to an MSP or, switch hands of who has the provider, and so then it changes days and timelines. So, a traveler might ask me, hey, do you have this contract? Well, I will. I'll usually get it in 2 to 3 days, and then next thing you know, it pops up on the job board because it's with a different MSP now, and we have it live time and stuff. So it's very tough to follow along sometimes, and I would say, people on Facebook groups and stuff, not necessarily getting blown up for not knowing their information or not knowing their providers and those kind of things. It can, as a recruiter, you can get stumped pretty quick on keeping up with those things. So
to that fact, I guess to that point, some of the relationships we have kind of dictate the amount of rope we get and how willing they are maybe to give us a crack at something before their normal threshold would maybe have expired.
Correct.
Based on internal relationships and based on our model of having no real tie-ins. We don't have a one person for this MSP, one person for that VMS, that kind of a model. You know, we do see sometimes the differences that relationship can still make. You know, our approach when we have these type of relationships is, you know, treat it just as if you would if it was a direct client. So instead of your point now being at the hospital, your point is with, you know, one of the MSPs or one of the VMS reps.
Yep.
Traditionally, like I said, there is no delay in job to market through the VMS platform. So really what we're talking about, that delay is isolated to the MSP side. And again, it's not that the hospital jobs aren't getting out in front of people, it's that they're not trickling down to the sub companies like us. But what we do find sometimes is that, you know, based on that internal relationship, these nurses are in a lot of companies' databases, so there are a lot of times that they're hearing about needs before they've been released to us. So based on the relationships, sometimes those MSPs do allow us to send a profile to them stating, hey, basically this nurse has been with us, she's pretty loyal to us, kind of give them that spiel and say, we understand there's an opening, is there any way we could trump that delay?
Sure.
And then they come back to us and say, there is no need, we've already filled it, or absolutely, let's give it a shot. You know, that kind of a thing. So,
But it's always
you
worth
don't know
asking.
you don't know if you don't try.
Right, it's always worth asking.
Yep.
So now let's go back to the VMS model, because you said there generally isn't a delay. What about a tiered system? Because there's tiering systems to VMSs out there, which is some. Right?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. The tiering thing seems to be something that's really taken hold lately. It kind of seems to be the in vogue thing right now. What I do believe that's a reaction from one of the things you see a lot in this industry is VMSs going to MSPs and then MSPs going back to VMSs. You know, the hospitals maybe get convinced that there is a better way maybe of doing it than managing it themselves, based on a number of factors. It could either be, you know, their internal resources, they don't have enough to, you know, designate a full-time person to doing this, or one of a number of reasons. But what you do see is that they kind of switch between each other. The reason I believe for tiering is one of the things the tiering does is it still kind of cuts down on that pool. Some VMSs might have 1, 2, 3, 400 companies as their subgroup. And so it's still a lot of work for them at that point to manage that large volume of customers. At the end of the day, almost any client has about 20 true companies that are regularly filling their needs. And so that is something that we've seen starting to take hold in the way of a tiering structure. So those VMSs will provide opportunity. They'll look at data. You know, one thing VMSs and MSPs traditionally have is a lot of money backing them up and a lot of resources to where they can run data and see who are truly focusing on filling these and who are just trying to have contracts to say they have the contracts. So those companies putting the effort into developing those relationships are getting rewarded with maybe earlier access. But I'd say the difference is the hospitals are always signing off on this. You know, it's not the VMS necessarily saying this is happening, whereas the MSPs, that's just their default model. Okay.
Understood.
And, you know, Rich and I, we've talked about this a couple times, not necessarily specifically on this topic, but as a hospital, if you got 400 calls from 400 different agencies every single day, it would be a full-time job for 1, 2, 3 different people. So then that's why they go to a VMS or MSP. Well, it's the same thing with a VMS or MSP. They're getting 400 calls from different agencies saying, hey, I want this job. What jobs do you have? So they go to a tier system of people who have been successful on filling their jobs, who keep their nurses compliant, who pay their fees on time, all that kind of stuff. And then that's where you get to a tiering system. So they're only dealing with their top 20 companies, 30 companies, 50 companies, whatever they choose that to be. As less of a headache of trying to work with 400.
True. Well,
on there.
And I know we're throwing around a number like 400. That might seem like a really big number, but that's actually infantile. I mean, the industry is 1,200 plus companies strong. You know, at least in the nursing parameter, or I guess in the nursing realm. Over the last year, I've had the opportunity to literally go sit in 10, 12, 14 VMS corporate offices, MSP corporate offices, and sit down and talk to these people and see the sheer number of companies they're truly working with. And again, based on that company setup, you're talking, you know, a possible exposure of 1,200 companies. Obviously, not every company has every contract, but you know, the bigger VMSs, you know, their fingerprint or their thumbprint is all over the country, so they do get exposed to different people in different areas, different regions. Little niche companies that might just say staff Georgia, or might just staff OR, or might just, you know, so there's room for them in certain areas. But beyond that, when you talk about the companies based on setup, they could have multiple contacts within a company. So when you sit there and say these people are getting 200, 300, 400 phone calls, that's absolutely legitimate.
Yeah.
And sometimes, there are these sexier jobs. They're, the easier to fill, the better bill rates, better locations. And when those things drop, every company has somebody for that job, and they're literally getting beaten up. I remember just this past March, I was in an office for 1 hour, and the lady I was with when we got done pointed out she missed 27 phone calls, and she's like, and then she opened up her email, and I mean there were dozens and dozens more.
Yep.
So you extract that and look at it. That's every hour of the day, and that's just for one job she posted. That didn't have anything to do with the 20 clients she was servicing from home. So I get how overwhelming that side of the relationship can be as well. So
it's very easy to hate on the VMS model, right? But when it comes right down to it, they bring value to the hospital that could be unmatched, right?
Yeah.
Fair or not, right? I mean, fair or not, that hatred on the VMS model has always kind of been there.
Yeah, you talk about the David versus Goliath thing, when it comes to that thing. Again, a lot of these people are big companies, big corporations, big dollars, GPOs, capital investment firms backing these things. So they just have resources that, an upstart company like ours doesn't have. So, you kind of got to look at it one of two ways. You're either going to fight them or play nice with them, and use them and their resources to hopefully help build your business and our business. And, that's kind of been our model up to this point is play nice with everybody, play nicer with those that choose to give us more opportunities, that kind of a thing. But, it is reality. I don't have any firm statistics to back this up, but I've heard from more than one of these visits I've done this year that VMS MSP is in about 78 to 82% of every hospital out there. And if you look at the quarterly reports that the publicly traded companies put out there to the public, those numbers seem very consistent.
Absolutely. Okay, so then let's talk about the VMS model dominating what we do right now, right?
Yeah.
And where's the MSP model in relation to that?
Yeah, so I think the VMS model was around first, by my understanding, and started with a large platform, and obviously slowly gained traction. Whenever there's anything that seems to be successful and new, it always spawns copycats. Sure. Everybody always maybe sees a kink in the armor or a way to do something better. So they start their own competing product, and then now instead of just one or two places hearing about it, you got twice the companies out there starting to call and pitch the same idea, which turns into 4 companies, 8 companies, kind of that upside down pyramid that just takes off. And so then the industry becomes very aware of this new opportunity or this new offering that's out there. But there became the opportunity where they were still using this software and not getting their needs filled. So then there came the day where somebody was like, you know what, we can do it, but we need to own the process, and by owning the process, we're going to put our name behind whether this succeeds or fails. And what that means is we're going to enter into like a true partnership. So instead of us just being a vetting body and trying to weed out all of the nonsense or the unqualified people for you, we're going to put our name behind whether this does or doesn't succeed. But in order to do that, we need to run it fully. Internally. Obviously, we're not going to be doing the hiring of travelers for you. You still have full hiring, firing decisions when it comes to that. But we're going to go out, we're going to vet the companies that are good for you to work with. We're going to, push all of our recruiters to fill these needs and make it a priority. Now, I don't think, it's ever truly probably advertised when they go into the hospitals that, there is going to be a delay between when we start working on filling it or us sending it out to the entire supporting partner network. But that's kind of, I believe where it kind of came from. I don't think most hospitals think to have it written into their contracts when working with MSPs that there's not going to be a delay. And if it's not in the contract, then it's just managed by, whoever's providing it. Right. Where I have seen, some new contracts come out or seen some places retain the MSP partner they have, that's been something that's starting to get worked in from the hospital end to look out for their interest.
Sure. Do you believe at any point the MSP model will overtake the VMS model in popularity?
I think it already has. I think the MSP model is a pretty easy one to come up with because, again, it's already proven to be successful in a lot of cases, and all you really need to do to offer it is have a staffing wing in your company. If you provide travel nurses, there's really little to keep you from providing staffing. It's one of those things, we're a respectable sized company at this point, but there's companies out there much smaller than us that have true MSPs in hospitals around the country. And it's either relationship based or volume based. Where the expenses come into play is supporting those nurses coming in from outside of your company. How do you really make your money work on the fee you charge the companies, because you still have to have all the internal support,
right,
which takes a piece of the pie, to support those subcontractors.
I think the important part as a traveler, the information that they really need to know though, is a lot of times I hear as a recruiter is I want to go to this hospital and I'm being told that I can only work through big company A.
Yeah.
Well, that's the only thing that the hospital knows is that big company A runs the MSP. That hospital doesn't know that we can still send our candidates through big company A. So you can still work for us or whatever company you're working for, but it's not true that you can only work with that company. The hospital's going to tell you that, but that's not typically true as we work with most of those major MSPs.
Yeah, and again, a lot of that comes down to which MSP they're using and their willingness or ability to educate that client.
Yep.
We do calling into hospitals and marketing into hospitals. We hear both, we can't work with you because we only work with X company. Or, hey, yeah, we'd love to work with you, but you need to reach out to X company to see who you can come in through.
Sure.
As a nurse, I also heard other nurses come to us and say, hey, we need to get you guys added to this hospital. So I think a lot of that comes from, the willingness of that MSP to educate the contacts at the hospital as to the process. There's also this assumption, one of the big benefits from the hospital side when they do come to working with MSPs and VMSs, that it's going to cut down on the number of calls. It cuts down on the companies that have the contract, but the other companies that don't have that subcontract with your facility are going to continue to try and reach out and find that angle to either A, get that contract directly with you, or at least get to the point of you speaking up and having them added. Unfortunately, if it gets to the point of them, rubbing the contract so wrong that they'll never ever work with them, usually what that means from this side of the phone is, okay, me as an individual at the company, I'm done trying to get it. But 6 months down the road, there's that new hungry employee that's going to try and pick right up on the trail and start making those phone calls again. So
exactly,
it limits the amount of phone calls from the customers or through the companies like us that sub through their vendor. But it doesn't eliminate calls as a whole. It'll never eliminate calls as a whole.
Right.
And from our end too, once we have that agreement in place, we don't call in. We won't make those direct attempts. We do respect the authority that the VMS or the MSP has. That keep us away from the client directly, but we also don't have a full all-encompassing list from any of them as to what all their customers are. So that does cause some problems from our end when we call in a market to find out that it's somebody we're already supposedly have a relationship with. The other thing I think it's important to notate out is that just because you have a relationship or a contract in place with an MSP at one hospital doesn't mean you have that relationship with every hospital that they run.
Correct.
So just because, and what you were talking about, some of the confusion from your end earlier, you hear that, yeah, we do work with company X. Well, this new location is also with company X, so you immediately assume we're good to work with them. That's not reality. There still needs to be some sort of pain from their end to add us.
Absolutely.
Traditionally, if we do have a direct relationship, and that facility ends up making the decision to go to a VMS or an MSP, we're onboarded and we retain the relationship through the new VMS or MSP. But if you don't have the contract and somebody takes it over, you're kind of starting over again in that effort to get it.
Which leads me to our Facebook post of the week.
This is the Facebook post of the week.
So I figured Facebook post of the week this week, I thought it was interesting because it has to do with resumes and hospitals. And might be interesting from a client management point of view, the answer to this question. Resume question. Now, this comes from I believe where was this from? This was from Scrub Squad 1978, from that group. Resume question. When highlighting your experience, do you list each individual hospital you've worked at, or do you put your agency only? If listing the hospitals, do you emphasize only the impressive ones or all of them? Please satisfy my curiosity.
Yeah, I mean, easy from the recruiter, obviously. The way that we have it set up is you list every hospital down. Basically, and the importance of that is when you go to do a background check, most places require you to do a by zip code or by state, city, county that hospital was in. They will go back and check all those. So just saying that I worked for Atlas from 2015 to 2018 is not going to suffice a background check in our industry.
Right.
And eventually you could put that, but eventually you're going to have to list those out. So the answer to the question is you're gonna want to put the dates, March through June 2018 with the hospital, and then go into specific information: unit ratios, trauma levels, teaching hospital, non-teaching hospital, critical access, and maybe some information about the unit that you're on.
Yeah, from our side of it, I mean, absolutely every place you've worked should be there. I mean, I'm not saying you need to go back to your high school days working the fast food counter or the grocery store, but when it does come to putting together a resume for a professional job, a healthcare job, a job as a nurse or a therapist or an allied health professional, if it's ever discovered that you've withheld something, that just doesn't have a positive connotation to it. You instantly go to somewhere negative if you find out that somebody left something off.
Even if it's not, right?
Even if it's not, but I can't imagine any motivation or any good reason why you'd withhold something. Reason being, the thought process there immediately is that you're not being forthcoming.
Sure.
So as an employer and doing a lot of the hiring from this side, we've had internal instances where you have found out something's been left off a resume, and every time it skews my impression of that individual coming in the door and whether they've gotten a fair shot or not. So, I would say that carries over. That is part of just being a professional and being, honest. I mean, your resume is supposed to be a perfect depiction of where you've been. Saying Atlas is great. You can put it down there as a subline as employer, but location needs to be listed. A hospital sees Atlas, they don't know if that's a level 1 trauma center.
No.
They don't know if that's a sister hospital that they're not allowed to hire people from, You run into that all the time. Systems won't hire people who are currently employed with them, if they don't see that.
Well, and then it gives you an extra layer. It gives you, the nurse, an extra layer of protection too. So you're talking to your recruiter about a certain job, right? And so that information's on there. You're going to vet that. Okay, yep, you've worked in similar size hospitals or trauma centers or whatever. You send that resume over to client manager. Client manager does the exact same thing before he sends it on to the hospital for review. So
Are
it's an
you
extra,
qualified for this position?
It's an
I mean,
extra level.
It's a really good point. Being in this role, very few people that sit in these seats as client managers or recruiters actually have that healthcare background themselves. So the vetting process is at least threefold in most companies, and it's what's the resume look like is a big piece of it. I can at least look, even as a non-healthcare professional, number of beds, trauma unit, floating expectations, nurse to patient ratio, does that or does not match with the job description? If so, I've vetted them. If it doesn't, that's an indicator to me that I'm either, one, putting somebody in a position to fail, or two, putting the hospital in a position where they're going to hire an inappropriate fit. So that paired up with references is a big part of us qualifying an individual. So yeah, if you're leaving off your level 1 trauma hospital because it maybe wasn't a great experience, or because it's a current employer and you can't run the risk of somebody verifying employment,
Right.
it really could set everybody up for failure.
And I get it. Not every contract's awesome, right?
Oh,
But
no.
it's all part. It's all part of your resume, right? And it's all part of your work experience. Get it on there. Make sure it's there.
Yeah,
Make
sum it
sure
up, put it all there.
Yeah, make sure that detail is there. So, Mr. Seitner, thank you so much for being with us today. I really appreciate it.
It's fun. Hopefully it turns out all right.
I think we'll be okay. I think we'll be all right. So next week, I have no idea.
We'll have to come up with something.
It's College World Series here in Omaha.
College World Series, if you are anywhere around Omaha, tomorrow starts the College World Series. If you've never been here for that before, think about coming. It is, even if you're not a huge baseball fan,
It's just a fun time in Omaha.
Yeah, it is a great time. Omaha really turns out for amateur sports and college sports, and it's a great time. Stop by. We'd love to see you.
Have a great day.
Thank you, guys.